The problem with being magnetic was that everyone thought they had permission to touch. Menya Cole had learned this early. Not in a bitter way, she wasn't built for bitterness. But in the way a woman learns the weight of her own presence when every room she enters decides to rearrange itself around her. She'd been in Seoul for 3 years and the city still hadn't figured out what to do with her, which she found endlessly entertaining. Tonight, she was at the Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive private event in Seoul's elite calendar, hosted at Haewon Tower's 72nd floor penthouse, where the champagne came in bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent and the guest list was curated the way surgeons operated. With precision, no room for error. Menya was there because she had earned her seat. Managing director of Voss and Lim International, the only black woman in a C-suite position in Seoul's top 5 corporate firms. A woman whose quarterly presentations had made grown men adjust their posture. She had not been invited as decoration. She had been invited because her company needed her presence to signal taste. She just also happened to look absolutely unreal doing it. The dress was deep burgundy, off-shoulder, hugging every curve with the kind of architectural loyalty that made it clear the fabric had made a commitment. Menya was 5'6" and built like a him. Full hips, a waist that curved in like a secret, and an ass that had once caused a man to walk into a glass door in the Gangnam district. She wore her hair out tonight, thick dark coils falling past her shoulders, gold hoops catching the light, skin glowing like she'd been moisturized by the ancestors themselves. Her heels were nude, strappy, Italian, and devastating. She stood at the edge of the dance floor with a glass of moat in one hand and her phone in the other, texting her best friend back in Atlanta. Menya. Bestie, this party is full of people who don't know how to have fun. Jade. Then be the fun. Like always. Menya. Already are they ready though, skull? She pocketed the phone, finished her champagne in one elegant sip, handed the empty glass to a passing waiter with a wink, and walked onto the dance floor alone. This was not unusual for Menya. She had long since stopped waiting for permission to enjoy herself. The DJ, bless him, had just switched from the stiff orchestral arrangements that had been soundtracking the cocktail hour into something with an actual pulse. A slow, heavy Afrobeats-infused track, all bass and longing, and Menya moved into it like she'd choreographed it personally. She wasn't performing. That was the thing people always misunderstood about her. She wasn't dancing for anyone. She was just free arms lifting, hips swaying with that deep, unhurried confidence of a woman who had made peace with every single inch of herself. The nearby Korean models, 5 of them in a cluster near the bar, all angles and expensive silk, were watching her with a particular brand of envy that Menya had clocked but chosen to ignore. She'd been the subject of their pointed whispers since the moment she arrived. Too much, too round, too loud, too present. Menya had developed an elegant immune system to such opinions. She was mid-spin, eyes half closed, fully in her body, when she felt it. Presence. Behind her. Close. Too close. Hands. Large, unhesitant, and warm. Settled on her hips from behind, moving with her rhythm like they already knew it. Menya stopped. Not with panic. Not with shock. She stopped the way a queen stops. Slowly, deliberately, and then she turned around. He was tall. That was the first thing. Taller than she'd expected, which was saying something because she'd expected tall just from the width of the shadow he cast. He was dressed in a black suit that had clearly never met a wrinkle, with a single white shirt open at the collar, no tie, the kind of effortless that took significant effort. His jaw was sharp enough to file tax documents on, his hair dark and slightly pushed back, and his eyes dark brown, almost black, with the kind of depth that suggested he was either very intelligent or very dangerous or both, were looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that made sense. He was smiling, barely, just a curve at the corner of his mouth, like he found her reaction amusing. Menya looked him up and down, slowly, thoroughly, with the precision of a woman who had absolutely no time to waste. Then she said, bold choice for a man I've never met." He tilted his head. "I saw you dancing alone." "Yes," she said pleasantly. "Because I chose to. I thought you might want company. I didn't ask for any." "No," he agreed, unbothered. "But I wanted to offer." Menya studied him for a moment. He wasn't flustered. Most men flinched by now. From her directness, her size, her refusal to soften. This one was just watching her. patient, like he had all night and didn't mind spending it right here. You know what your problem is? She said. He raised an eyebrow. Tell me. You assumed that because I was dancing alone, I was waiting to be found. She smiled, bright and brilliant and completely devastating. Baby, I'm not lost. I'm just enjoying myself without requiring an audience. A beat. Then he laughed. Not the polite, controlled chuckle of a man performing amusement. A real one, surprised out of him, warm and low and genuine. Changed his whole face. Made him look younger, less sculpted, more human. Menya blinked. She had not expected that. You're right, he said. I apologize. She hadn't expected that either. She narrowed her eyes. You're not going to push? Would it work? Absolutely not. Then no, he said simply. But I am going to stand here and hope you change your mind. Just so you know. Menya stared at him. He stared back. The music continued doing its work underneath them, all that bass and heat, and something she could not name was moving. Through the air between them like a current. She pointed at him. What's your name? Yoon Teo. Menya Cole. She extended her hand, formal, deliberate, the way she did in boardrooms when she was establishing terms. He took it and shook it, firm, proper, like he understood the language. And Teo, if you step behind me on this dance floor again without asking, I will embarrass you in front of every single person here. And I am very creative. His eyes lit up, genuinely, like she'd just said the most interesting thing he'd heard in years. Understood, he said. May I dance with you, Menya Cole? She considered him for exactly 3 seconds. His posture, the stillness of him, the way he hadn't looked at her body once since she turned around. Only her face, only her eyes. You may, she said regally. But keep up. I don't slow down for anybody. She turned back to the music and felt him step into her orbit. Not behind her this time, beside her, and they fell into a rhythm that was embarrassingly natural. His movement was controlled but fluid, that quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly how much space he occupied and was comfortable in every inch of it. Menya matched him and raised him because that was simply who she was. Around them, the floor had begun to notice. It was subtle at first. A few turned heads, a pause in conversation. Then more. Then the cluster of models by the bar, whose whispering had gone completely silent. Menya clocked every single one of them and smiled to herself. What she didn't clock, because she was busy enjoying herself, as was her right, were the 4 men stationed at different points around the room who were watching Yoon Teo the way planets watch a sun. Still, alert, ready to move the moment he moved. She didn't notice the way the host of the gala had visibly straightened when Teo stepped onto the dance floor. She didn't notice that half the room had unconsciously shifted, the way water shifts when something large moves beneath the surface. She was just dancing with a very handsome man who had finally learned to ask. Later, they found a corner of the terrace. The real one, the private one, accessed through a door she hadn't known existed until he walked her through it. And soul spread below them like a circuit board lit gold and silver. The sky above them a deep, clean indigo. He brought her a fresh drink without asking what she wanted, but brought exactly what she'd been having, which meant he'd been paying attention before he approached her. She noted that. So, she said, leaning against the rail, the wind lifting the ends of her hair. Yoon Teo, what do you do that gets you the private terrace access? He was quiet for half a second. Just half. Business, he said. Vague. Investment. Acquisitions. Some private contracting. Also vague. He smiled. What do you do, Menya Cole? Managing Director, Voss and Lim International. She said it easily, without performance. Just fact. Something moved through his expression. Respect, clean and real. I know that company. Most people in this room do. You run the Asia-Pacific division. She tilted her head. You've done your research. I just paid attention, he said. Your Q3 market restructure last year moved 4 competitor firms off the top 10 list. It was decisive. Menya looked at him differently now. Not because she needed his validation, she had never needed that, but because most men at events like this only knew her by what they saw standing in front of them. This one had known what she'd built before he ever walked onto that dance floor. You're not just in business, she said. He met her eyes. No. Then what else? Something we can discuss another time, he said, and his voice was careful but not evasive. More like a man choosing the right moment rather than hiding from the question. Menya studied him over the rim of her glass. The Seoul skyline glittered behind him. He was, objectively, the most attractive man she had encountered in 3 years on this continent, and she had encountered many. But it wasn't just that. It was the stillness of him. The way he listened, actually listened, not waiting for his turn to talk. The way he'd laughed when she roasted him instead of shrinking. The way his eyes hadn't left her face all night. She had a rule. She'd built it carefully after a string of situations that had taught her, in increasingly expensive emotional currency, that beautiful men in powerful rooms were often only interested in the architecture of her body and not the engineering of her mind. The rule was, don't get interested at a party. She was, inconveniently, getting interested at a party. Another time, she repeated, like she was filing it away. I'd like there to be another time, he said quietly. Menya turned back to the view. The city glittered. The wind moved through her hair. Somewhere inside, the music had shifted to something slower. We'll see, Teo, she said. And the way she said his name, easy, familiar, like it already belonged in her mouth, made him go very still beside her. She pretended not to notice. She absolutely noticed. Yoon Teo was not accustomed to chasing. This was not arrogance, it was simply geography. In the particular ecosystem he inhabited, people came to him. Requests, favors, alliances, information. All of it flowed toward him like water running downhill, pulled by the gravity of what his family name represented in certain circles of Seoul. He had grown up understanding that his presence was a resource and that most people who sought it wanted something extractable from it. This was why Menya confused him in the most wonderful way possible. She wasn't pursuing anything. She wasn't even leaning in his direction. She had given him her business card at the end of the night, slid it from a small gold card holder in her purse with the brisk efficiency of a woman used to networking, said, in case the next time you want to ask someone to dance, you'd like to make an appointment first, and then walked away into a waiting car without looking back. He had laughed all the way home. His head of security, Baek Juno, had given him a very concerned look from the driver's seat. She roasted you, Juno said flatly. Several times, Teo confirmed. And you're smiling. I am. Juno was quiet for a moment. Then, should I be worried? Teo looked at Menya's card. Clean white, burgundy font. Her name, her title, a Seoul number and a professional email. Probably, he said. He waited 3 days before he contacted her. Not because he was playing games, but because he genuinely needed those 3 days to figure out how to approach a woman who had made it abundantly clear she was not impressed by the things that usually impressed people. He couldn't send flowers to her office. She would find it presumptuous. He couldn't leverage connections to arrange another accidental meeting. She would find it manipulative. He couldn't lead with what he was, because what he was had never been the right opener for anything real. He sent one text. Simple. Teo. This is Yoon Teo. From the gala. I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as an event. Just food. Somewhere with good jerk chicken, if that's possible in Seoul. He'd done his research. She was Black American with Jamaican roots. He wanted her to know he'd paid attention. The response came 40 minutes later. Menya. The jerk chicken research is noted and frankly impressive. But I need you to know my schedule is not flexible, so you're gonna have to work around it. Not the other way around. Teo, tell me when you're free. Menya, Saturday, 7 p.m. And if you're even 5 minutes late, I'm ordering without you and I eat a lot, so that's your problem. He arrived at 6:52. She was already there, seated at the corner table of Kismet Seoul, a Caribbean fusion restaurant in Itaewon that she had apparently discovered 3 months after arriving in Korea and had since treated as a personal embassy. She was in a burnt orange midi skirt and a cream silk blouse, hair pulled back in a high puff with gold pins, earrings that swept her collarbone, rings on 3 fingers. She looked like a Sunday afternoon somewhere warm, and she was reading something on her phone with the concentrated frown of a woman who brought her brain everywhere. She looked up when he approached, assessed him once, top to bottom. 6:52, she said. You were nervous. He sat down. I was considerate. You were nervous? She repeated. But she was smiling. And that smile was, it was a whole situation, wide and real and slightly wicked at the edges. the smile of a woman who found the world genuinely funny. The dinner lasted 3.5 hours. This was not the plan. His security team had briefed for 2. But somewhere between the jerk cauliflower appetizer and the second round of rum cocktails, time had simply stopped being relevant. Menya talked about everything. Her childhood in Atlanta, her mother's Jamaican cooking, learning to move through spaces that weren't built for her and deciding that was everyone else's. Architectural failure. She talked about Seoul, how much she loved it, the food, the efficiency, the beauty of the Han River at sunrise. She corrected herself. The river, she said deliberately, not by name, I'm superstitious like that. The frustration of navigating corporate spaces where her presence was still 3 years in considered surprising. They expect me to be grateful, she said, spinning her cocktail glass slowly, for the seat at the table. And I am not grateful. I built a wing of the table. There's a difference. He watched her say it. Not with heat, not with exhaustion, but with the calm certainty of a woman who had processed this truth so completely it had become boring. You're very sure of yourself, he said. I am, she agreed. Is that a problem? The opposite. She studied him. Why do I feel like men don't say that to you often? Which part? The opposite part. She tilted her head. Men like you usually want women they can feel superior to. It's more comfortable. I don't need comfortable, he said. I need real. Something flickered across her face, brief, quickly controlled. But he caught it. What do you actually do, Teo? She asked, setting her glass down. And I want a real answer this time, not the investment acquisition speech. He looked at her for a long moment. This was always the question. He had answered it 100 ways for 100 different purposes. But sitting across from Manya Cole, who had a built-in lie detector behind those eyes, he found he didn't want to perform. My family, he said carefully, runs certain operations in Seoul that require significant influence. Not all of it is conventional. Manya was quiet. How unconventional? She asked. Unconventional enough that powerful people are careful around my family name. She sat back, looked at the ceiling briefly, like she was consulting something up there. Then she looked back at him. So when you say private contracting, I mean things that don't have standard contracts. She picked up her fork, took a bite of her entree, chewed thoughtfully. And you're telling me this on the first date? You asked for real. I did, she acknowledged. Then, I'm not scared of power, Teo. I interact with powerful people every day in my industry. But I don't do complicated. I know. And if you think what you just told me is going to make me feel special, like you're trusting me with something, I need you to understand I'm too smart for that. He almost smiled. I know that too. Then why tell me? Because I'd rather you leave now than find out later and feel deceived. Menya looked at him for a long, measured moment. The restaurant hummed around them. Somewhere behind her, someone's birthday was being celebrated with a cake and an embarrassing song. I'm not leaving, she said finally. But I'm also not impressed by power. I have my own. I know, he said for the third time. She pointed her fork at him. You're going to stop being so agreeable. It's throwing me off. No, I'm not. She burst out laughing, sudden, full, completely unguarded. And it was the best thing he'd heard since she told him he was making a bold choice. His chest did something inconvenient and architectural. They talked until the restaurant started stacking chairs. He walked her to her car. She did not invite him up to her apartment. She had a beautiful high-rise in Mapogu with a balcony garden she'd mentioned briefly and he'd filed precisely. And he did not push. Same time next week? He asked. I'll think about it, she said. She thought about it for approximately 11 minutes. He knew because her text arrived while he was still in the car. Menya, fine. But this time I'm picking the restaurant. And yes, I'm going to pick somewhere expensive. Teo? I expected nothing less. Menya, you're so weird. Good night. Teo? Good night, Menya. He sat in the back seat smiling at his phone like an absolute fool. Juno glanced in the rearview mirror and said nothing, which was the most dignified gift he had ever been given. What Menya did not know yet, what was unfolding in a different part of the city while she was washing off her makeup and dancing alone in her kitchen to a coffee song, was that the story of Yoon Tae-oh going soft-eyed over a black American woman at the Obsidian Gala had already traveled 3 social circles, and that not everyone found it charming. Yoon Soo-yeon was 61 years old, had survived 3 attempts on her family's operations, raised a son entirely alone after her husband's death when Tae-oh was 14, and had never once in her life been described as simple. She was also, Tae-oh had long accepted, completely impossible to prepare for. He had arranged a lunch, neutral ground, a private dining room at a restaurant she liked in Cheongdam-dong. He told his mother exactly what he was going to say. There is a woman. I like her. I would like you to meet her before this becomes serious. Clean, straightforward, adult. What actually happened was that his mother arrived 20 minutes early, rearranged the entire table setting because she found the original layout aggressive, ordered a spread of food before either of them arrived, and then greeted Menya at the door with both hands outstretched and the declaration, in accented English, of, "Oh, you are beautiful." Tae-oh said beautiful, but I thought he was exaggerating. He never exaggerates. Come, sit here. This seat has better light. You must sit in the good light. Menya, God bless her, did not miss a beat. Thank you so much, she said warmly, taking both of Soo-yeon's hands. He told me you were elegant, but I think he undersold it. Soo-yeon grabbed her son's arm and hissed in Korean. She has manners. Why are you so surprised looking? Close your mouth. Tae-oh had not been surprised looking. He had been bracing for impact and received flowers instead. Lunch was extraordinary. Soo-yeon had prepared specific questions that she delivered in the order of a very pleasant interrogation. How long in Seoul? 3 years. Did she speak Korean? Conversational, working on it, at which point she said something in Korean that made Soo-yeon clap her hands. What did she cook? Everything, but her Jamaican food was spiritual. Did she want children? Menya raised one eyebrow at Tae-oh. He looked at the ceiling. Ama, he said. What? It's a good question. It's the third question. The first 2 were warm-up, Soo-yeon said serenely. She looked at Menya. He's embarrassed. He gets embarrassed easily. Don't tell his associates. Your secret is safe, Menya said gravely. Soo-yeon burst out laughing. Real, loud, undignified laughter that bounced off the private dining room walls. Tae-oh looked at the 2 of them. His mother, tears forming at the corners of her eyes, and Menya, grinning like she'd won something, and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't known was unsettled. But the jerk chicken incident happened on week 4, and it changed everything. It was a Saturday. Menya had, by this point, cooked for Tae-oh twice, once at her apartment, where she made brown stew chicken and rice and peas from a recipe her grandmother had written in a notebook that was so worn it was practically scripture, and once at a beach house he owned in Jeju where she'd commandeered his kitchen for 4 hours and produced an entire Caribbean spread from ingredients she'd sourced from 3 different international grocery stores. He had watched her cook the way people watch something sacred. She moved through a kitchen like she owned the physics of it, instinctive, confident, narrating to herself in a low mumble that switched between English and a little Jamaican patois when she was really in it. The jerk chicken incident occurred because he had a work dinner, the kind that required his full attention and several of his most senior associates. And Menya, who had been at his residence cooking since noon, decided to send him off with a container of leftovers. This was loving. This was sweet. This was also how the most feared Mafia heir in Seoul's elite underground ended up standing in a private dining room with 6 of his associates. Men who had, collectively, never once shown an emotion publicly. Receiving a text from Menya that read, Menya, I labeled your container. Do not let those men eat your food. I made that for you. There are exactly 4 pieces of chicken and they are all yours. I'm serious, Tae-oh. He smiled at his phone. His associate Lee Hyun-woo, who had made men weep for sport, looked at him cautiously. Everything okay? Yes, Tae-oh said. His phone buzzed again. Menya, I can tell you're smiling at your phone right now instead of reading my instructions. Read the instructions. Menya, the container with the blue lid is yours. Do not mix it up. Menya, also I reorganized your spice cabinet while I was there. You're welcome. Some of those expired in 2021. I threw them away. Don't argue with me. He put his phone down. The 6 associates were watching him with a collective expression of total bewilderment. These were men who had seen him negotiate in rooms that cost lives. They had never once seen him look like this. She reorganized my spice cabinet, he said, to no one in particular. Complete silence. I think, Lee Hyun-woo said carefully, that we need to start the meeting. But the real test, The one that didn't have any humor in it came 2 weeks later, when a particular faction of Seoul's social elite decided that Yoon Taeo's interest in a foreign woman was an inconvenience to their plans. Specifically, 3 families who had been quietly positioning their daughters toward Taeo for years, and who found the idea of a Black American managing director with Jamaican roots and zero deference to Korean social hierarchy both threatening and offensive, started small. Whisper campaigns in the circles Menya moved through professionally. Rumors about her competence, her background, her motives. A particularly vicious piece of gossip, anonymous, untraceable, cowardly, that suggested she had only achieved her position at Voss and Lim through personal relationships rather than merit. Menya heard about it on a Tuesday. Taeo found out on a Wednesday from his mother, who had her own intelligence network that operated independently of his, and was frankly more thorough. Soo-yeon called him at 7 in the morning. "I need names," she said before he could speak. "Amma, I'm not asking you to do anything dramatic. I'm asking for names because I have a luncheon on Friday with 4 of the most influential women in this city, and I need to know exactly who needs to hear exactly what about Menya Cole's professional record." Taeo paused. "You're going to defend her." "I'm going to correct the record," Soo-yeon said crisply. "There is a difference. Your woman doesn't need defending. She needs the right people to know the truth, which I will ensure happens over a very pleasant meal." A pause. "Also, I already bought her a gift. A Jeju honey set and a pair of gold bangles. Don't make it weird." "You bought her." Taeo. Names. What Soo-yeon did at that Friday luncheon was never fully disclosed, but within 48 hours, the Whisper campaign had gone very, very quiet. And 2 of the families involved had found themselves navigating unexpected complications in their own professional circles. Menya found out about it, partially, a week later, when a gold-wrapped package arrived at her office with a note in careful, elegant English. "The world is full of small people who confuse cruelty for power. Ignore them as I do. These bangles look like something you would choose for yourself. I thought they should come from someone who sees you clearly. Welcome to our family, Menyaya. Don't tell Taeo I used that name yet. S.Y." Menya sat at her desk for a long, quiet moment. Then she put on both bangles, looked at them catching the office light, and texted Taeo. "Menya, your mother is incredible." Taeo, "I know." Menya, "I'm keeping the bangles." Taeo, "She'd be offended if you didn't." Menya, "Also she called me Menyaya and told me not to tell you." Taeo, "She told you not to tell me and you immediately told me?" Menya, "I tell you everything. She'll learn." He stared at that last message for a very long time. "I tell you everything," said easily, without drama, without performance. Just fact. He called her that evening and they talked for 2 hours, which was not unusual by now. But somewhere around the 90-minute mark, when the conversation had drifted from the drama to nothing in particular, her describing a coffee shop near her office she'd found that made cardamom lattes exactly right, him listening in the particular focused way he had that made her feel like the only frequency he was tuned to. She said something that stopped both of them. "This is the thing I was scared of," she said quietly. "What thing?" "This." A pause. "You. Feeling like home." The city hummed outside his window. Seoul, restless and luminous. "Is that bad?" he asked carefully. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in Jamaica, Jamaica. I go every year for carnival," she said, and he could hear the smile returning to her voice. "And before you say anything, yes, that was an invitation. Don't make it weird." He made it weird. Just a little. "I've never been to carnival." "Oh honey," she said. "Then you have absolutely no idea what's coming." The Kingston airport in June smelled like heat and possibility. Menya walked off the plane and something in her body changed. A release. Like a knot she'd been holding in her shoulders since winter finally let go. She'd always been this way about Jamaica. Seoul was her ambition. Atlanta was her foundation. But Jamaica was her exhale. Her grandmother had been born in St. Elizabeth Parish. Her mother made her rice and peas from memory, no recipe, no measuring. Carnival was just the excuse. The real reason she came back every year was to remember who she was underneath everything she'd built. She turned around and found Taeo standing at the arrival's gate looking slightly stunned. "Hot?" she asked sympathetically. "It's," he looked around, at the color, the movement, the sound. Everything alive and immediate and uncontained. "It's very different." "Different from what?" "From anywhere I've ever been." "Welcome to the island," she said, and grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, and that was that. They stayed with her cousin Tamara. A decision Menya had made specifically because Tamara was exactly the kind of woman who would give Teo a full, unfiltered Caribbean family experience and would feel no guilt about it whatsoever. Tamara took one look at him at the door, then looked at Menya, then back at him and said, in the most Jamaican way possible, "Lord, okay then." He was welcomed, fed immediately, rice and peas, ackee and saltfish, fried plantain, a sweetness of rum cake that nearly knocked him sideways, and then interrogated gently but thoroughly by 3 different aunties who materialized from various parts of the house like they had been waiting specifically for this moment. He handled it beautifully. Menya watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, smiling into her rum punch, as Teo answered Auntie Claudette's questions with the same focused patience he brought to everything, and actually made her laugh twice, which was considered a small miracle. "He's polite," Tamara said. "And very handsome, Menya." "Don't," Menya said. "Does he know about you?" "Don't." "You're glowing." Menya smiled a little. "I'm in Jamaica. I always glow here." Tamara nodded. "All right." The week felt slow and peaceful. One morning they drove to the Blue Mountains. Just the 2 of them. They drank fresh coffee and enjoyed the quiet. Another day they went to the beach. It was small and calm. Menya had been going there since she was a child. She swam in the water while he stayed on the shore, watching her quietly. One evening they cooked together. Menya showed him how to make rice and peas. It was a family recipe passed down for years. She guided him step by step and corrected him when he made mistakes. "You added too much coconut milk," she said. "You told me 1 cup, he replied. "I said about 1 cup. Cooking is not exact. But you said I should be careful. Be careful with the taste, not just the measurements." "I am trying to learn." "Then taste the food," she said. He tasted it and paused. "It needs more coconut milk," he said. "Exactly," she replied. They both laughed. It was easy and natural. They stood close in the small kitchen. Neither of them moved away right away. Menya stayed where she was. Then Carnival Day came. Menya wore bright blue and gold. Her outfit was full of color and movement. Her hair was natural and free. She looked confident, strong, and beautiful. The most beautiful thing on the road. The music was everywhere, inside everything. A soca bass line that lived in the chest cavity, and Menya moved into it the way she moved into any music she loved. Completely, without reservation, every curve and every swing of her hips speaking its own language. Teo was beside her. He was not a carnival man by nature. He was a controlled environment man, a stillness as power man, but something about being next to Menya in this much joy was doing something to his architecture. He was moving, genuinely moving, poorly by any objective standard, but genuinely. She turned to look at him, and the laugh that came out of her was so pure and startled and delighted that people around them looked over. "Oh no," she said. "What?" "You're doing your best, and I respect that. I think I'm doing well." "You are not," she said with tremendous affection. "Here." And she took his hands and put them at her waist and showed him. Really showed him, slow and patient and close, how to follow the music instead of fight it. He was a fast learner. He always was. Within 20 minutes he was moving with something that could be called, generously, rhythm. "There," she said approvingly. "See." He looked at her. His hands were still at her waist. The music was big and warm and everywhere. The Jamaican sun was falling into the afternoon in that liquid gold way it had. "Menya," he said. I'm in love with you." The road moved around them. Music, color, life. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. No performance in it. No strategy. Just Yoon Teo, fully present in a country he'd never been to, in a crowd he'd never moved through without her, saying the truest thing he knew. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I know. We're in the middle of carnival. I know. I have feathers in my hair. I know. You look extraordinary." She pressed her lips together. A smile was trying to happen, and she was not quite ready to let it. "I love you too," she said. "And if you tell anyone I said it first at carnival, I will deny it forever." He pulled her into him, both arms fully, and she went, which was itself the revelation. Menya Cole, who kept her own counsel, who moved through the world at her own pace and on her own terms, leaned into this man like she'd found the one place her guard had never been required. Around them, music, color, the island, the late afternoon light doing everything it could. He held her like he meant it. She let him, which meant everything. The months that followed were their own kind of story. There was the morning she came to his residence to find Soo-yeon had let herself in, reorganized his living room, and was teaching herself how to make Jamaican patties from a YouTube tutorial while loudly criticizing the instructor's technique. Menya stood in the doorway and watched for 2 full minutes before saying anything, and when she did, she just pulled up a stool and sat beside her and said, "You're using too much butter in the crust." And Soo-yeon looked at her and said, "Show me." And they spent the next 3 hours in that kitchen, and Teo came home to something that smelled like joy. There was the quarterly board meeting where Menya presented a market restructure so decisive that 3 Korean executives, men who had smiled at her arrival with the particular condescension of people who had already decided she was decorative, left the room recalibrated, and she walked out into the corridor where Teo was waiting. He had no business being there. He'd come anyway and said, "Buy me dinner." And he said, "Anywhere." And she said, "Everywhere." And he said, "Yes." There was the moment, quiet, ordinary, a Sunday in her apartment, when she was cooking and he was reading and the rain was doing something soft against her balcony windows, and she said, without looking up from the pot, "I was scared of this, you know?" And he said, without looking up from his book, "I know." And she said, "I'm not anymore." And he put the book down and looked at her and said, "Good." And that was it. That was everything. Menya Cole had built her life on the understanding that love was something to be approached with intelligence, with humor, with the full force of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. She had not been wrong. She had just finally found someone worth spending it on. And Yoon Tae-oh, who had run operations in rooms that feared him, who had inherited power like a responsibility, who had learned early that most people wanted something extractable from him, had found, in a burgundy dress on a dance floor in Seoul, the one thing nobody had ever tried to take. Something real. Something worth protecting. Something worth being, for the very first time, completely undone by.
Hello besties, if you spent so long making yourself smaller, quieter, thinner, softer, less trying to become something people will finally choose, but the right person doesn't choose you because you shrunk. They choose you because you refuse to. Stop editing yourself for a world that was wrong about you. The right love, the right room, the right life, it was never waiting for a smaller version of you. It was always waiting for the real one. Thank you so much for watching. Can you like, subscribe and share?